Alrighty, hello everyone. Hope everyone is well. Um, just going to see if I can offer an insight into Parshas korach and see what valuable life lessons and ideas we can learn from this parsha. We have the idea over here. His face is "Ve'kach kar v'yitra ben Gehaz ben Levi." It doesn't have Reuben and Boaz ben Reuben. So Rashi points out immediately that says like this: Ben Yitzhak ben Levi, so the korach, the son of Yitzhak, the son of Kaz, the son of Levi, but his kir ben Yaakov. Why? Shebikesh rachem al atme. Yaakov asked mercy for himself. Shali zacher shemoi al machlekosam, that his name should not be mentioned upon this machlekes, this fight. Shenemar bikalam al techad kivodi. Heichen is gar shemoi al korach. Where was his name mentioned upon korach? That korach had an association with Yaakov. On the duchan, in the when all the people of Misach and Dirayam, it says, and Asap and korach ben Yitzhak ben Kaz ben Levi ben Yisra. Okay, so then you have over here Veikalu that Aaron, that the korach was makil. They brought into kahal the people onto Moshe and Aaron, and they said, okay, so there's obviously a lot of elements over here. We're going to ask some basic kashas and try to give an understanding which perhaps can teach valuable life lessons for us. The most basic thing over here is the idea that if you look, it says mefurish twice, or for sure once, that it says that Hashem told Moshe to bring Aaron in front of him and to basically declare that Hashem told him that Aaron was the one that was in charge, meaning he went out of his way to do this. I believe it could be in Parshas Shmini. And it just seems very hard to understand Here we go. Why is it calling Ziknei Yisrael? Hashmiyam, to make it heard to them. Shapia dibur Aaron nichnas and meshamish begehuna gedola, v'lo yamru me'elav nichnas. So this is what Rashi says here in Shmini. So he's calling all his genim is to tell them that it was al pia dibur that that Aaron was nichnas. So you see that Moshe framfitted, he performed this problem by gathering all his genim and telling them, look, because Baruch Hu is mitzvah me. Now, the belief of the people in Moshe Rabbeinu was not based off anything other than the clear vision in Har Sinai of Hakadosh Baruch Hu talking to him. That's what the Pesukim say. It says, Hashem said to Moshe, Alei lai hara v'gam b'cha yaminu le'olam. So it says first in the pasuk that Hashem tells Moshe, and they should see him, Moshe, talking to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, so that they believe in him forever. And that's what happens. They see him in Har Sinai talking. That's the basis of the Jewish people's belief in Moshe Rabbeinu as the prophet of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, really, these two things are maybe two separate kashas, but really, we'll ask it as basically one kasha. We know that all the Jewish people, Korach included, Dasan and Abiram included, saw Moshe Rabbeinu talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu at Har Sinai. And then we know that Moshe Rabbeinu himself gathered his kingdom to tell them that it was Apiyah Dibur that he was appointing Aaron. So, if you follow the clear logic structure over here, Har Sinai happened. The people saw Moshe Rabbeinu talk to Hashem. They therefore believed that he was Hashem's Navi. And to believe that Hashem's Navi, then when he gathers them and tells them specifically that he's appointing his brother, not because he's his brother, but because it was a Piyadibor, it is mukhrach, it is necessary, must be that they believe him. Because that's what Pasuk says. Pasuk says that. And that's what occurred in Har Sinai. So it's a pliya. How is it possible that how is it possible that the korach can convince, and he himself, how is it possible that he was chaylik on this? It seems almost really impossible to understand what the pshat over here is. The other question is that you see in the Rashi over here, Rashi says this. He says, "Well, Hisker ben Yaakov, because he was refer the Yaakov Avinu did not want his name. He saw in Ruach HaKodesh this was going to happen, and he didn't want his name to be mentioned upon this act. Now, the shaila is, Rashi goes on to say, and then he says that it was in the Pasuk Yavayim, it is meyaches korach to Yisrael. So, simply speaking, that this Rashi is really just unreadable. You can't read this Rashi. First, you say that Yaakov didn't want his name to be mentioned. So that means he wants no shaykhs. Then you say in Yavayim he is associated with him. Well, Yaakov and Esau are the same person. What shaykhs to say that Yaakov didn't want the names mentioned, and yet somehow in Yavayim he's misyaches to Yaakov as he is called Yisrael. But we know the Gemara says lo she'akir Yaakov mimakaymai ela tafel v'Yisrael ekir. So we know that Yaakov and Yisrael are synonymous in the same person, l'cha'ira. So what is the advantage and what is the taich of the fact that it's okay for korach to misyaches to Yaakov Avinu as he is Yisrael? What's the taich? What does that mean? Why is that? And then the last shaila we really ask over here is, what is this inyan of v'hikwahalu al Moshe v'Aaron? What is this idea of v'hikwahalu, of them bringing in a congregation or gathering upon them? We obviously understand that the ikr idea over here was the kehila. How do we know that? We know that because when Yaakov was characterizing this event, Yaakov Avinu himself, he says, "Bik halam al techad kevodi." So he's saying that he doesn't want his honor, his name, the significance of what he is, to have any connection to their bik halam. This word means their gathering, which means that Yaakov understood, and the Torah understood, and obviously we'll understand this through that lens, that the ikr thing that occurred here was a kehila, a gathering, upon Yaakov Avinu, which was l'ra'ah. And it was this gathering that disturbed Yaakov Avinu very much, to the point that he did not want the person who instigated this gathering to have any yichus to him. Keilu, that when it's saying who korach is shaykh to in his lineage, he's not shaykh to Yaakov. That's what it's saying. So, in order to understand the answer to these questions, let's go to the source and let's examine what the idea over here actually is. So Yaakov is talking to his children, and he says, okay. So he says like this. He says, Shimon v'Levi achim. So Shimon and Levi are brothers. Klei chamas me cherosehem. Their kelim are klei chamas. So what does that mean? Their kelim are klei chamas. Rashi says, klei chamas umnus zu shel ritzicha, that Shimon and Levi murdered, is chamas hu b'yadehem. Mibirkas Esav hizu. It is from the Birkas Esav. Umnus shalohi va'atem chamastem oisei hemenu. This is the umnus of Esav, his bracha, and you stole it from him. And so Yaakov is essentially saying this: Shimon and Levi Achim, you stole Esav's korach, Esav's bracha, and then as a result of that, or because of that, I don't want this. Now let's read further. Besaydam tavoy nafshi bi kalam. This is our event over here. So Besaydam is referring to the Maisa Zimri, and then bi kalam al tichak vadi. This is Maisa korach, and we pay very close attention. So he doesn't want his name to be misyachis to the Maisa Zimri or the Kehila of korach, which is our parsha, and he says ki va'apam harguish uvertonam ikrushar. So ki, in this context of Torah, there's four options for what the word ki means throughout the Torah, but over here, it either means deha, which means that, or it means because, whichever way you want to choose. Let's just say that we'll choose the word because. So whichever way you read the pasuk, it's mukhrach. What it's saying is like this, and Rashi brings it over here as well. Right? Kishakil korach, so according to Moshe Val Aaron, I don't want that, and it says ki because ba'apam harguish, because in their anger they killed a man, and that's chamor and shechem, and then mitzvah nikushar ratzul akaris yosef shenikroshor, and that those two actions were the reason why Yaakov earlier characterized them as klei chamas mecharseim, right? And that's what it says here, Beit achas al Shechem ve'al Yosef. That's Shimon v'Levi Achim. That's what that's saying. And on that it's saying klei chamas mecharseim. So what Yaakov is essentially saying is like this. He's saying that the concept of the reason that Shimon and Levi are cursed, and the reason why he predicts that they're going to have these maisim of korach and of Zimri is because of Ba'apam Harguisha V'Tana Mekushar. And the reason why they did that was because Klei Chamas Mechar Sehem. This is, we're showing everything in the Rashis over here, very clear. And what that means is they stole the Birkas Esav of our Char B'Chasechia. Now, in order to get insight, let's first understand what the pshat is in the bracha of Esav of Char B'Chasechia. People, the simple understanding of the bracha of Char B'Chasechia is the idea that Esav was supposed to get the brachos, and since Yaakov tricked him, he sold his Bechira, etc. So therefore, now his only manner of survival is by the sword. He can only survive by the sword. The thing is, that can't be the pshat, or definitely not the whole pshat, because over here the lashon of Rashi is birkas Esav hizu, and Yitzchak's response to Esav is when he says to him, he says baracheni gam ani avi. And Yisuf's response is al char b'chasechim. So, l'chayra, we have to really understand what that means, because on one hand, al char b'chasechim means you will live by your sword. On the other hand, it's a bracha, and we know that bracha by definition always has to mean an overflowing. The sharish comes from brecha, which means a overflowing body of water. So if the char b'chasechim is a bracha, it has to mean overflowing. It has to mean a general mechanism, a way of thriving. And at the same time, it is al char b'chasechia, which sounds like it's inherently talking about survival. So how are miyashiv? We're miyashiv by understanding the following profound concept. And that is that the yesoid, the basis of the idea of the bracha of Esav is the fact that once Yitzchak made him an eved to Yaakov, it's the case that Masha Kana Eved Kana Rabbo, and the Eved is considered Kiyad Rabbo, which means he has no identity whatsoever. He has no separate identity. So what that means is the following thing. The Bracha of Esav Char B'Chasechia is the idea that Esav no longer has a definition, and the only way that Esav / Edom / America, etc., can thrive is by overtaking, by dominating other individuals, and most acutely expressed by their murder. But the concept of Achar B'Chasechia is itself this idea. In other words, that Esav exists on the level of domination and consumption and overtaking of others and other cultures, societies, beings. This cannot be more accurate in at any point in history, but even I think most acutely Bisman Hazeh, it cannot be more accurate that the whole some idea of America, besides from the fact that Al Harb Chasichia, that their only reason why they're Bechlal in control of the world is because of their military and is because of their Kharif, practically. But the depth of the Yesod is that their only method of survival for Edom or for Esav is existing on a level of overtaking others, and that existence being on the external level of reality. In other words, that there is no pneumius to the concept of Esav. And the Chazal bring this out. I'm not going to put up the Chazal at the moment, but Chazal bring this out by comparing Esav to a pig, because a pig is Mara Simane Kashrus. It has Simane Kashrus, and which is split hooves, and it shows everybody. It says, "Look, I'm a kosher animal." Although in reality, it does not chew its cud. And this means, on the simple level, it means that as far as Esav is concerned, everything is just a show, which is also true of Bisman Hazeh, which is also true of America. But on a deeper level of it, it's not just that it's a show, it's that even it's that B'yatzim Esav has a level of kashrus, but that level of kashrus is only in terms of the idea that it has overtaken other things, not that it itself has any etzem or makor or yesoid to its concept of malchus. And the contrast to that is to Yaakov. And Yaakov, however, is the idea that Yaakov is his name is given to him and signifies the concept of basically emerging, basically having a a sense of development, a sense of self, of inner self, of an identity of what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with other people, and that self is emerging into being what it's meant to be. Is the concept of Yaakov. In other words, it is the complete antithesis to the concept of Yaakov to do anything which has any sort of idea that exists on an external level and that attempts to dominate or overtake. That is the antithesis and the part that is a completely impossible thing for Yaakov to do. So, therefore, what now is going on is the following thing. What has to be understood is that, as we know, Esav was supposed to have gotten the brachos and was supposed to have done what he was supposed to have done with them, but in fact, Yaakov got them. And if you refer back to our shir on the episode of the brachos, our understanding essentially was that the act of deception, which is an act of existing on a reality of an external level, that Yaakov did, basically brought him to par with Esav, because of the fact that he referred to himself as existing on an external level, telling his father that he was Esav. And the fact that he said that wasn't a lie, it was a dynamic change in Yaakov's own perception that he was able to exist only on a level which exists in terms of the idea of how it's perceived, not in terms of what it actually is. And we explained that concept by Yitzchak is din / show, that shir that we did on Vayera, that whole thing. So, immediately we have to understand now that there is two parts of the journey of Yaakov Avinu which turned him Kaviyachol into Esav. In other words, it's where he overtook Esav's responsibilities, and that was in his marriage of Leah, because Leah was meant to go to Esav, and that was in his taking of the brachos, which were the brachos that are meant for Esav initially. the name that Yaakov gets as a result of the fact that he took over the brachos of Esav is Yisrael. And Yisrael is a name which it has an inherent implication of Sarisa, which is what the Pasuk says, Ki Sarisa im Elokim v'anashim v'atuchal. And Sarisa basically means that you fought them, you overtook them, you bested them. And that name has within it inherently a concept of domination, which is why it is a separate name from Yaakov. Now, we therefore go on to understand the following thing. We know, it says over here, that says okay, it says Rakos, just to prove to that point, because Leah and Rachel are both tzadikos, and since Leah knew, she thought, and she was supposed to, she thought correctly, that she was supposed to go to Esav, so therefore she was crying. And so that's what you see. In other words, Leah was a what's called a yetzanis. She was someone who went out, and someone who, we see that several times throughout the Chumash, and that the midah of yetzanis is the midah of Esav. It's the midah of going out and dominating, and whereas Yaakov's midah is to be ish tam yoshev halim. He sat in the tent. He didn't go out. So there's a contrast, a clear contrast, which the reason for that is that Leah was meant for Esav, and Esav, it says all in the Chumash, it's constantly he's going out. He's constantly going out. He's constantly in the field. So that's because they were supposed to be the initial match. So what that means is like this. What that means is that the children that Yaakov has with Leah are essentially a mix of the concept of Yaakov and Esav in terms of the characteristics of it, and therefore they are the people who represent very vividly the concept of Yisrael, because Yisrael is the aspect of Yaakov which he had to create within himself to overtake the brachos of Esav, whose role it was to be Sar, to dominate. And therefore, those two people, those children of Yaakov and Leah were they had the midos of Esav. So essentially, like this, what we're tying is that the concept of the bracha of Esav is that Esav can only live and thrive based off the idea of dominating somebody else. That's the etzem yesod of the way that Esav lives. If I can't dominate something else, then I don't exist at all. That's how Esav is. That's how America is. The Dua. And America only is only a thing because of the fact that they take people and skill and talent from all over the world and bring it to there because they pay for it. And without that, America would be gone a long time ago. It's a Dua. So the idea is that the act of Shimon and Levi was an act that was done betor within the midah of Esav. And essentially, what that means is like this. And this is what Yaakov Avinu is saying. He's saying like this. The way that you know that I'm right about the association between the Yisrael and the act that they did is because if you look at the response that Shimon and Levi give to Yaakov, when he says to them, "What have you done?" they say something very, very peculiar. They say, let's see, they say like this. They say, so it's like this. V'yamru, Hachez zoyna yaseh sachisin. However, let's look over here. It says like this. ובני יעקב באו ונתג השמיים ויסעתבו אנשים וייחר להם מאוד כי נבלה עשה where בישראל why were they upset? Because the Nevala was done in Israel, and therefore they attacked. Therefore, when Yaakov confronts them, they say to him, "Vayamru, that can't be done." So essentially, what we have an understanding is that the reason why Shimon and Levi did what they did was because a Nevala was done by Israel. And therefore, what we now have an understanding is the idea like this. Shimon and Levi were incorrectly took in a character flaw and a mahalach, a way of dealing with the world around them, which was rooted in the midah of Esav, of being yotzei, being of murdering, and that the avla of that, and what that really means is it's not that the acts of murder that they did were incorrect. In other words, the factual behaviors, the factual acts of what they were doing was wrong. That's not true. Ramban discusses that. And even you see in the pasuk that Yaakov, when he curses them, he says, Ki v'apam haragu ish u'ritzonam ikrusha. And he says, v'apam, says in their anger, they were oiker anish. It refers to Shem. So Rashi says, afilu, even in the time of Klala, they only curse their anger. So in other words, what that means is that the idea of Shimon and Levi, of the concept of what the wrong that they were doing, was that they insisted on existing on the level of Yisrael, which was disassociated from Yaakov. And Yisrael, disassociated from Yaakov, not having any connection to it, is essentially the midah race. In other words, it's a mechanism which exists on an external level. And Shimon and Levi gave priority to that external level of reality. And therefore, they indulged in a midah of Esav to protect the external reality of Yisrael, because they viewed that as Iker, and they disassociated themselves from Yaakov, who is essentially serves as the essence, the lifeline, the side of what Yisrael was meant to be. In other words, Yaakov is basically considered to be the identity structure. In other words, the midos, the characters, the relationships, the interrelationships between all of the shvatim that makes up the entire nation, and then that nation is as a Yisrael. In other words, they are the star, they represent HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that representation comes in terms of the idea that they dominate the world as a representative of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is definitely a valid mechanism. But the issue with korach and with this mahalach was that it was a peichamas and makarisayim, and you see clearly the flow in the pasuk. I'm not making this up. In other words, you have that word, a very important, crucial, the key, right? It's very, very clear over here. And it says, key, because the reason why Yaakov doesn't want his name to be associated with them is because of the fact that they killed Shechem and tried to kill Yosef. And that is because of what we're saying, that they existed on the reality of an external level. In other words, the fact that they emphasized and prioritized the fact that the Jewish people are a Yisrael. In other words, they are representatives of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world. And that is an external reality. In other words, as we discussed in the past, the idea that the externality of that concept is meant to pacify the Midas Adin, so that people can be impressed upon by the fact of they're seeing us as representatives of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And since Shimon and Levi prioritized that led them to indulge in a character flaw of anger important to understand is the following thing, and this is also very, very patterned throughout the entire Chumash timeline and different stories. You can see it. The manner in which a character flaw goes from being a character flaw to being a operating perspective within a nation, and the manner that something goes from being an internal issue of the way that a person relates to those around him into becoming something which is a concept which exists on an external level so that it can be projected as being a part of Israel, as being a part of the way that, the Jewish people should show themselves or should be related to. This itself is created through the idea of kehila. And what that means is that it's very well known, is that the truth is that the concept of any time more than one person gathering around and performing actions based off a view of a concept takes that concept from being a specific internal issue in a person's character flaws and it aggrandizes it to being a way of, people expressing themselves, and aggrandizes it into a value, into a manner in which someone or people will operate. Because that's, as everybody knows, whenever anybody wants to start a cause or give emphasis to a concept or give it value, essentially what they do is they gather a certain amount of people, and all those people revolve around this one concept. And it has to do with the obvious idea that as is always true, just like it was true by Kabbalah Sadara, the mode in which something operates as a value inherently has an implication that it will be shared by many different people, because the concept of the value as being something which is important yet not tangible is expressed by the fact that many different people share the exact same value, and therefore it can express itself within all of those people as a concept which is a value as opposed to it just being a character flaw. And that would be if it would be limited to one person, and he would just be, it would just be a personal issue that he has. So, using that idea, we can now understand the concept of the kehila. What is the bikhala? What is this idea of vayikohalu al Moshe v'al Aaron? What does it mean they gathered on them? What that means is that Moshe and Aaron were expressions of the inner, not only obviously, but they were expressions of the inner basis, the inner makairos and ideas and processes that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted and needed for the development and growth of the Jewish people at that time. And this is expressed. You know where this is expressed. That this is what Moshe was. You know how you know this? You can see this clearly because Moshe says like this. You know what Moshe says? Moshe says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he says to him something very interesting. If you don't understand, our Mahalach, it's very short to understand what this has to do with anything. But it says, "Vayichal Moshe Ma'od, Vayomer Hashem, Al Tevin Milchasam." Right? He's saying this. Saying, don't pay attention to these people's, offerings. The people who are going against Moshe with korach. And he says, you know why? Lo chamor echad mehem nasasi. I never took any of their donkeys. Lo arioses echad mehem. I never did anything bad to any of them. What on earth does this have to do with anything? What shaykhs? What's Moshe talking about? Oh, I didn't take any of their stuff. I never did anything bad to any of them. Like, okay, I could says, I'm the leader, I'm the king, because Moshe had been melech. But you see, I didn't do anything like that. Don't pay attention to that. What is he saying? What he's saying is like this. What he's saying there is zero aspect of Moshe which ever had any sense of domination, any sense of existing on a reality which was external, which thrived off the taking of others, and having something which did not belong to him as part of who he was. That was something that Moshe never did, which associates him and puts him in the grouping of Yaakov Avinu and of the essence and of the emerging Ishtam aspect that existed and that does exist within the nation of Israel, of the Jewish people. Because, like Chazal say, Yaakov was never Nekar. The Jewish people are called Yaakov. It's a integral part of the operating mechanisms that occur within the Jewish people. And again, it refers to the idea of having someone and his life being totally working on a scale of total emergence. At no point does this person ever reach for something that's not his. Rather, he relates to things around him, and as his relationships define him, and as he goes, he emerges. The person that he is emerges from his relationships. He never dominates. He never takes something that's not his, and he never has anything that's not meant to be his as part of what he is. As antithesis to Esav, which is exactly the opposite of that. And we know that by the Roiv, that Esav says Yeshli Rav, Yaakov is Yeshli Kol, is brought out many times throughout the Chumash. So that is the concept over here. The concept is that korach attempts. So now let's get the understanding. We know that korach was a Daisei Aaron. Korach was not a simpleton. He was not someone who is just petty and gets jealous for nothing and has no real ideological basis for his understanding. We know that that's not true. And therefore, what we understand with korach is that korach's perspective on the reality of the Jewish people was in its deepest sense that they are Yisrael, which means that they are meant to be beings who represent God's presence in the world. And that is 100% the case. The thing is, korach disassociated that from Yaakov. And that means that korach did not have an understanding of the need for the emergence, for the essence. In other words, the ishtam, the essence of the Jewish people. In other words, the part of them that was internal, that actually related, that actually had relationships with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with different things. Rather, he viewed it as being an entirely external thing. In other words, the idea is to have a being. That being is a star of God. He represents God, and if he represents God, that is the whole idea of Yisrael. And maybe you need some internal relationship just for that to sustain the Yisrael. But in Korach's view, because of the fact that he's from Levi, and because of the sense of the idea of Shimon and Levi as them taking the bracha of Esav, which is what we tracked earlier in Parshas Vayechi, his whole perspective in Judaism was that of din, and that of it being a entity which exists primarily on the level of externality. It exists on a level that it can be perceived, not on a level that it is, in fact. And that is the concept, because we know that the korach of Yaakov is, and our korach is bepez in our mouths. What does that mean that our korach is in our mouths? It means that we pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu helps us. And by the way, if you look throughout the Torah, there is actually no word that means winning, like winner or loser. Those words don't exist in the Torah. So that's just something, that's a food for thought. already taking long enough. But the tzaddikim always say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should be matzil them. Should save them. And you have to say, Leini nam yarachim yarisa. And you look throughout Yeshua Aschat Yeshua Yeshua see, and all this idea of saving, Yeshua. Why is it that there is no word for HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Make me win, make me dominate, you don't find anything like that. And that's because the whole idea of a tzaddik is that a tzaddik never wants to win, never wants to overtake anything else. There's no reward, there's no geschmack, there's no pleasure in the fact that I put you down, I'm the winner. The only thing that a tzaddik wants is to be himself, is to be his genuine sense of self. And when that gets attacked, he needs to defend himself, and that takes overcoming somebody else. And therefore, the tzaddikim characterize that as being saved, as a Yeshua. Now you look throughout all of Tehillim, look throughout all of Chumash, always tzaddikim saying, all of these different things are Yishi every time. It's being saved. It's never, Hashem, let me win. It's never like that. There's no such thing. There's no word for win in the Torah. In biblical Hebrew, there's no word for winning, because winning is irrelevant. It's a non-reality. And therefore, I just want to end off by showing you, I think it's a brilliant, that the reason I'll show you almost foolish that I'm right. It's almost the Torah itself saying that I'm right about the understanding of this concept. Because what is Yaakov's response to the issue of Shimon and Levi? You know what he says? Guess what he's going to do? He's going to Achalekein beYaakov va'afitzein beYisrael. Yaakov's response to them is, I'm going to divide them in Yaakov, and I'll be mefitz that I will spread them out all over Israel. Meaning that Shimon and Levi never have the opportunity, not with each other and not within their own tribes, to gather, to be in one place, to have a kehiva. Yaakov understood so profoundly that the issue was the gathering, that his solution is to spread them out. And we'll try to give the depth of this very briefly. Rashi says that Chalkim beYaakov afridem zeh mizeh, shlo yehdei b'mein hashvatim arein chalupi. So what Rashi is saying over here is that essentially the name Yaakov, as expressed, as referring to the entirety of the Jewish people, is a name which refers to the combination of all of the character traits and all of the midos of the Shvatim pulled together into one thing to comprise the Jewish people, and that is expressed in the name of Yaakov. And since the combination of Shimon and Levi together would, if they were allowed to both stay as regular Shvatim, that combination would infuse the overall identity of Yaakov with this, destructive Esav-like behavior and Asa and way of operating. Rashi says that Levi is out of the Me'in HaShvatim. And since Levi is no longer Me'in HaShvatim, Levi is now considered, Levi's midos and all what he is now devoted to God totally. And therefore Levi's midos and what he is has no contribution to the overall definition of Yaakov anymore. And therefore he can't combine with Shimon to create the problem. So that is the Chalkein beYaakov. And by the way, just so you can understand what I'm saying, it says over here like this. It says Yish Kivrei Chasol Birach Osam. Rashi says Yish Kivrei Chasol. Where is it? Yish Kivrei Chasol Birach Osam. Rashi. Okay, lo yadam Yish Kivrei Chasol Birach Osam. Matam al Osam. Fish nothing with the words regularly. I'm going to test this later. I'm going to go out. Yom Shekol Kol Kol Chabratzal Birach Osam. So, okay, here's what Rashi says. Right, so Rashi asks, what does it mean? Rashi is saying like this. Rashi is saying that although it's true that some of the Parshas didn't get blessed directly, there within all of what was said, the blessings apply to everybody, which is what I'm referring to when I say that there's overall identity structure of Yaakov. In other words, within the brachas, you see that what Yaakov did was each bracha applies to the Shevet, but those brachas all apply to everyone because they all contribute to the overall structure identity of Yaakov. Therefore, all of Klal Yisrael, all had each other's korachs because they're all coming from the same source, which is Yaakov. I just want to make clear what I mean by that when I say that. When Yaakov says, Amal came to Yaakov, that means he's taking away Levi from the Me'in HaShvatim. He's taking him out. The other thing is, this is referring to the Ba'afitzin B'Yisrael. This word Neflutzin. So, so what does this mean? This means like this. This is brilliant. Yisrael, we understood, means Sarkel. It's a position of external chashivas that can be seen that you are a chashuv, an individual who represents HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is your chashivas. Shimon, by being either poor, by being teachers of children, or by being, scribes, all of those things internally are exalted, at least the scribes and the teachers. But externally, meaning the way that those things interface with the world around them, has very, very minimal chashivas. It is very, very minimal perception of being anything significant. And Levi as well. Levi has to go around and he has to collect truma from people in order to survive. So because the Afite, the Israel, refers to the idea that the interface between the Shevet of Shimon and Shevet of Levi with the rest of the Jewish people is an interface which, on an external chashivas level, has very, very little chashivas. Because they're either little kids' teachers, or they're sofer, or they're scribes, or they're poor, or they're having to go around, getting their portion from each one of them. The point is that it's them being on the external level of relating to them, to the Jewish people, they're very lowly. And that's because if they wouldn't be, then they would have this destructive opportunity to infuse this Birkas Esav and this anger / defining themselves by dominating into the Jewish identity. And Yaakov wanted that to be addressed, and therefore he was mechalik them in their identity structures by taking Levi out of the structure of what Yaakov was by him no longer being one of the Shvatim, and then by in Yisrael